This is a presentation. It is my reflection of the author on a game that I created in Unity for coursework. This is what will be covered in the presentation, so let's begin. Brief was a 2.5D game with a side-scrolling camera. It was made in Unity. It's supposed to be showcase of what we had learned about Unity in our course. My idea was an auto runner like Subway Surfers or Temple Run, except the levels would be handmade and not procedurally generated. This would allow myself as a designer to create unique and appropriately complex platforming challenges for the player in a way that a generated level could not. You could move between 3 rows and jump to avoid obstacles, and those were the core mechanics. But I thought I should add an additional core mechanic to try and distance myself from similar games, so I settled on a fast fall, jump while in the air to fall almost instantly to the ground. And with my core idea and gameplay mechanics, I was ready to start designing. Choosing to say that these ideas weren't without constraints. Main constraints of a system was that it was very simple, and in creating a system that was intuitive, I also made a system that was difficult to expand on in a meaningful way. But it's still possible. The main way I feel like I could expand on it would be by creating more interesting level gimmicks, like something that was put near the end of my level, like spawning platforms or a time slow mechanic, something like that. Perhaps a duck or a slide, which is a feature that is popular in similar games. The level is short due to the dimension restrictions set on the brief, which was 100 by 15 by 15 meters. Since I wanted a fast-paced level, it turned out that if I'm continuously running 100 meters, my level turned out to be about 20 seconds long, which, outside of a restricted level design, the level could run on for longer, which should be fine. Given the speed that the player is moving, obstacles need to be understandable quickly and simple. I feel like I've done a good job with this, with color coding and consistent fail states, like walking into walls or touching red obstacles. Another constraint is that so far the coins are pretty pointless, other than to keep a score or guide the player on paths which are correct. This can be implemented into a rating system where you're judged on how well you did on each level and can't progress until you've done well enough or collected enough score. And the last constraint is that the fail-safe scripts for moving between the columns aren't perfect. There are certain fringe cases where you get stuck between the rows, but they're fringe cases, and I feel like I've created an adequate system for catching that, and for a prototype, and that can be easily improved. My design process was simple. I got a page of grid paper, created some rules for my player, like movement speed, height, jump length, and started gridding a level as seen in figure 1. I tried to make the first obstacles simple and repetitive, treating this level as if it was the first level in a larger game that was made to teach the mechanics of the game without overt tutorials. I tested the level in a variety of different gameplay styles to make sure there's enough wiggle room for the players to develop their own style and be expressive, which led to some amendments and iterations to the level. I shifted certain obstacles around and moved some. In figure 2, you can see where an obstacle was removed to give the player more options for completing the challenge, where you could either sidestep to the right or jump over the double barricade, where before you were pigeonholed into only doing the jump. In figure 3, the small barricade next to the large one was added. This was to force the player into some sort of action, where before that barricade was there, the player could just simply run through it and ignore the challenge altogether. I tested different values for gravity, speed, and height, just so I could get the feel of the game just right. And different obstacles and different shapes were tested, and not all of them saw play in my level. For a walkthrough, I won't be doing this, but the level is shown in its entirety at the YouTube link of the first video. But I can share the main concept of the level, which is having an easy and a hard path with different rewards. This is to reward experimentation with the game's mechanics, given how this was implemented as well. With a hard path above the easy one, there's always a choice to drop down and from the hard choice to the easy choice, if the top one is too hard. You would have to experiment with harder mechanics to gain entry to the harder path, as seen in figure 4, where you have to jump and move while in the air while jumping, and then have to clear some tricky platforming which requires the use of fast fall. My main inspirations were Subway Surfers and Temple Run for auto runners, and Super Smash Bros. For the fast falling mechanic. You can see in figure 5 a segment of the level from Subway Surfers with like color-coded labels for the different examples of aspects that I took inspiration from. For example, the coin pass in yellow, which guide the player, the 3-column limit in red shows the restrictions on the different planes that the player can move in, and the blue planes of a higher and differing elevation. But I wanted to make my level different from these, since these are procedurally generated and it's harder to make tailor-made and unique challenges in a procedurally generated system. So that's where I differed from these games. And I tried to create a system that fit with Steve Swing's definition of game feel as an aesthetic sensation of control. This was due to the exploration of button mapping and input, and creating a system where it's just enjoyable to move around in. I took away the player's ability to slow down, so there's no input for moving forward, it's always going. The horizontal movement automatically snaps you to the center of each lane, which takes effort away from having to line yourself up. And I rewarded the player for investigating the different aspects of the player character's moveset with a hard path with higher rewards. And I tried to create varying obstacles which rewarded different aspects of a movement, be it quick sidestepping or careful jumping and fast falling. It's the kinetic pleasure of moving through space, creating flowing arcs of motion and feeling your body instantly respond to your impulses. That is what Steve Swink said in his book. And that I interpreted that as actions that required different types of movement. So if we go back to figure 4, you have to jump over the double barricade, and then you have to jump and also slide left at the same time to try and get onto this harder path. And I feel that gave the player plenty of leeway to be expressive, and since the controls are very responsive, they have a high degree of freedom to move how they like, so any mistake that they make is purely their fault and they can't blame the level. And the compound movements create depth by forcing the player to improvise. When they come across a particularly difficult obstacle, they have to pivot on a dime and think of a combination of movements that will get them out of their situation, which forces the player to grow and learn and be more comfortable with the mechanics of the game. This would all be useless, however, if there wasn't any incentive for players to do better. So I tried to make my level challenging, so a player would have to put effort into learning the game systems. This can be found in the harder path, where more than just good platforming is needed. It takes some foreplanning and good reaction time. The obstacle in figure 6 requires the player to jump at the right time and fast fall at the right time to avoid the obstacles, which focuses the player into finishing an objective rather than aimlessly moving around in a system. And that's my game, and here are my references.